Hi, Dahlia Remler again. I'm going to talk now about secondary data. That means that it's data that the researcher utilizes that exist from some other source. This is still primary research when the researcher does original analysis. So it's not getting somebody else's research, but it is getting somebody else's data. So primary data is when the researchers are collecting their own data through surveys or all sorts of other methods. So obviously it's time consuming and resource intensive to collect one's own data, primary data, and it can be great to get secondary data which someone else has collected. We're also going to talk about not just traditional sources of secondary data where, somebody else did a survey and you got their survey data, or administrative data that's used for other purposes, but what's increasingly called big data, virtual world, online communications, transactions, integrated data. All of us living on the internet, just as you're doing right now watching this video. So there are a number of different forms of quantitative data, and I'm going to go through them. One aspect of it is the time dimension. So and I'll go through this in more detail. You can have a cross-section, just one point in time. You can have before and after. You can have panel data following the same people through in time. We'll get to pooled cross-sections later. There's also a level of aggregation. Microdata is the smallest possible. When you aggregate that, so maybe that's student exam data. You aggregate it to the class or the school. Some things are just intrinsically a single measure, or you've aggregated them. And then there's often, you're looking at things at multiple levels. Maybe that's student level data, class level data, school level data, all at the same time. So let's talk a bit more about this. So quantitative data, when you say something it's at microdata, that is the most basic level of observation or analysis. So an example would be individual student test scores. You might think, okay, student, you can't get smaller than that. But it depends on the context. Maybe you're going to follow the students over time. Maybe you're getting a lot of different information about the students, such as how they did on lots of different tests or how much time they spent watching videos for the course online. So what is the most basic level really is going to depend on the data. And again, these days with all of us, using Blackboard and clicking through it and watching videos on YouTube, that, the most disaggregated can be smaller than a person. Same person is doing a lot of things. But usually in traditional research, the most basic level is often the person. Aggregate data. Data summarized at a higher level of analysis. So a school, a city, average test scores for the school. Multi-level or hierarchical data are data that have the different units of analysis at the same time. So here you see like the individual students, they're aggregated into classes, or you've got them completely aggregated and our data is just a single measure. So take a second, think about an important outcome in your field of interest, education, public health, criminal justice, and think about what would microdata for this outcome look like. What would be the unit of analysis or the case, the who or what we're talking about? Most often the row in statistical software. And then think about what aggregated data would look like. What would be the unit of analysis on the aggregated data? So take a second, stop the video, write down your answers. Now let's think about the time dimension of data. A cross-section of data is data representing a single point in time. You're not following through at different points of time. Longitudinal data is any kind of data gathered over time. So there are actually a bunch of different types of longitudinal data. One is what we call panel data, repeated measures in the same individuals. That can be people, it could be repeated measures of the same hospitals. Let's take a look at that. So that top one is panel data. You see, you have that one person in the first period, say 1 year, a year later. So you have this student, you have their math test score in 1 year, the math test score the next year, the math test score the next year, and the same for a whole bunch of students. That's panel data. That's very useful. We'll find out how useful that is for causal research especially. In contrast, here's a pooled cross-section where the idea is, oh, okay, let's get a sample of students in 1 year. Next year, we're going to get a completely new sample of students, drawing from the same kind of population, but a whole new bunch of students. And then the third year, again, it's a new bunch, so not following the same people. There's also what's called time series data, and then you just got one number. That could be the average test score for the school, or it could be something that intrinsically just has one number, like the interest rate on a treasury bill, for example. There's just one number. So sometimes that time series is aggregated up, and sometimes it's just something that has one number. So now, again, think about your field of interest that you're interested in, education, criminal justice, whatever, and now think about what a cross-section of data would be for that outcome. What would a single cross-section? What would repeated cross-sections? What would a panel look like? What would time series look like? So stop the video, think about it, write your answer down. So now I want to go back to this and put this all together. So you have both dimensions. So you can imagine that, oh, I had cross-sectional data, right? I have microdata, but I have it before and after. So like I have student data, I have how they did on a test before we did some interventions, some way to improve our teaching, and then I see how they are afterwards. Or maybe I follow my CUNY students through their entire time at CUNY, getting lots and lots of data on them, but still at the student level. Or maybe I'm back to having a cross-section, but it's just all aggregated. So now what I mean about cross-section is it's a point in time, but I have one aggregated use. So you can see how these all fit together. But one increasingly important thing is while these are traditional and classic forms of quantitative data, increasingly unstructured data is increasingly important and used in machine learning, as we're going to talk about soon in another video. Okay.